Hello, everyone out there listening and watching. This is Adai Moon, the Associate Artistic Director at Theatrical Outfit, and I am here with Courtney and Matt.
Hello.
And we're here to talk about 100 Words of Snow, T.O.'s show that is streaming live right now, that is absolutely beautiful, and that we hope that you all check it out. Um, so, Matt, I'm start with you. So why 100 Words for Snow? Why now? Like why was that show you think T.O. needed to do right now?
Yeah, sure. So, in the fall, it became clear that everything that we had planned for now wasn't going to work out. Just with the pandemic and the way that it was progressing, we knew that we weren't going to be able to have audiences in the way that we wanted, and instead of just sort of looking at that as a kind of absolute disaster, um, we approached it as an opportunity,
Mm,
and we asked ourselves the question: if we knew what we were all going to be going through as a community, as a society, what plays would we be looking for and why? And that sort of big idea like was really the foundation for all of the decisions we made for the streaming season in the spring. Starting with the Catastrophist, which was about pandemics and about scientists and about mortality, and at a time when scientists were on the airwaves all the time, it was looking at one of their lives in some detail. This play, um, Gretchen and I, the managing director of Theatrical Outfit, we come up with this phrase that we were looking for something that was magical but not whimsical. That was that felt resonant to the times that we were in, but also had a sense of theatrical imagination to it, a sense of adventure, a sense of escape. Um, and I came across this play pretty quickly. I think I put into Google, magical but not whimsical. And then like
Magical.
3 clicks or 4 clicks later, this popped up. And it was one of those ones where like when I read it, I was just absolutely blown away.
Mm,
Because it tells the story of a 15-year-old girl in suburban London whose father has just been killed in a car accident, and she is lost. She doesn't know how to cope with grief. And there's this curious detail about her father in that he's a geography teacher who always wanted to be a polar explorer, but never went. Always dreamed about it, but never went.
mm,
So she grabs her mom's credit card, steals her dad's ashes, and decides to take him to the North Pole. And the play is about that extraordinary journey. And when looking at it through the lens of COVID and pandemic and illness and grief, it kind of offered two things. The first was an ability to really explore loss, but through the lens of somebody who is trying to overcome it,
mm,
someone who is trying to forge a way through, someone who's not content just to sit by and say, "Oh, this is too much." And the second is adventure. When we're all stuck at home, a play that involves flights and landscapes and sunsets and these incredible images of nature. It just felt like it was like strumming a chord with a
mhm.
lot of the things that were going on, both on the surface and underneath the surface of what we're looking at as a society right now. So yeah, um, we decided to do it.
That
I'm
is
delighted
tough.
we did. Yeah.
uh, so the brilliant Courtney, man. Woo! So Courtney's our production manager and producing during the era of COVID. Could you tell us a little bit about those challenges?
It presents like a multifaceted challenge. I mean, first and foremost, we're always trying to keep all of our artists safe in normal times, and this just adds about 1,000 layers to that. Um, we are a union theater, so we work with union actors and stage managers, and the Actors Union, Actors Equity. They've been great to work with, but they do have a pretty stringent list of the things you need to do to make sure your workplace is safe during COVID. So we had to negotiate with them a whole giant safety plan. Added a bunch of things that you don't even necessarily think about, from temperature checks at the door to literally making sure everyone is appropriately spaced in the theater. You know, normally we're all like huddled together and having conversations about what's going on, and now you're trying to have a conversation but 6 feet apart. You know, we had a daily safety meeting, which is a new thing for us, just to remind people of, you know, here are all the things that you should be doing. We tested for COVID 3 days a week, which was a lot of nose swabs. And we had some really fabulous nurses from Emory who came in to help us as sort of a compliance officer, just to, you know, as the week went on, we've all been there a little bit. You get a little relaxed, you get a little comfortable, you know, take a sip of your water. It might be a little slow to put your mask back on, or you might get a little close to people and they're just there to be like, hey, just a reminder, and just to gently like prod us back, because, you know, at the beginning of the week, you're like, oh, this is all new and I have to remember all these things. But by the end of the week, you're like, oh, I've been comfortable. We've been here. So it was definitely a challenge, but I think we were so eager to be back in a space together and so eager to make this new thing work that our whole group was just game for whatever protocol you threw at them.
Right. And speaking of this being, I mean, this is legitimately a new thing. This is a new thing. And Matt, thinking about that as a director, I mean, yeah, it's a play. It's a digital play, but it's also kind of a film. So how did that, the sort of reality of that hybrid nature of this project, how did that impact your directing process?
Well, it was really hard, and actually it was way harder than I thought it was going to be, because I think, you know, when you're so caught up in the creative process, you forget how much work just happens on breaks, like how much of the process evolves just by having coffee together, like in these sort of like in quiet afternoons, you know, and how much of that understanding of the work just sort of percolates or evolves in the group. So the first challenge was that we had to rehearse over Zoom, because we could only kind of arrange the protocols and to be together for 6 days in the theater, 2 of which were filming days. And it's so strange to log in every day to the Zoom room to work on the play.
Right.
And then sometimes little screens pop up as the designers come and visit. And you know, you only ever see the actor from like chest up. Or I think one day she like Jeter, who's amazing in the play. She stood up and stood away and was trying to do stuff with her arms. When you arrive in the theater on that first day, it is just the weirdest thing to suddenly recalibrate all of the relationships and recalibrate all of your thinking. And then we had 2 days where we had to kind of like turn this Zoom thing into something in 3 dimensions. We had to stage the play. We had to, you know, put it on furniture and use all the props and figure out what was going to happen. So that kind of like system shock to go from Zoom meeting to in the theater with lights and sound. I'd sort of underestimated how vivid that was going to be for everybody.
Right.
Just that to suddenly be together again, wearing masks and protocols and tests, and then when trying to really focus what theater on film is and what it isn't, we kind of had to figure that out as we went along. And this is why I'm just so proud of like Courtney and the design team, because we kept reinventing it. Like we kept saying, okay, well, what microphone is it going to be? Okay, not that one, this one, not that one, this one. Yes, great, got it, let's start again. Or we did lighting cues for the whole show, and then the camera came, and then the lighting designer had to readjust all of the color because it looks different. It looks different when you see it through the lens of a camera. Or we had these costumes that we loved when suddenly you put them up there and the camera didn't quite work the right way, so we had to adjust color and make new decisions. So that kind of like endless reinvention while you're also navigating all of these new circumstances emotionally was a challenge. So, but all that to say is we made a really, really, really smart decision at the very beginning, which was to focus the process on creativity and imagination. We decided we weren't going to treat it like a film. We weren't going to come up with projections. We weren't going to come up with film imagery for every single location that she visits in the play. We were going to try and evoke it through Jeter's brilliant performance and through light and sound. And really just being able to keep going back to no. As an act of emotional understanding, an act of character, and an act of imagination, what is it that we're trying to do? And that kind of touchstone, I think, is really clear when you watch the piece. You know, it's Jeter's. It's her performance. Right. She brings us on that journey, and the other things just help it along the way. So I'm really proud of how it came together.
Yeah, it came together beautifully. Courtney, you've done a lot of shows. And this one, because of the nature of it being this sort of hybrid thing, it was definitely different, I'm sure. What are some skills or some things that you learned from this that you think you're going to keep in your toolbox?
That's a great question. I think we had a really condensed process, which is not something I'm going to keep. Let me just clear up. I love a meeting and I love a meeting.
Please no.
I love a meeting very early. But the condensed process, I think, made us really focus in on what we needed and what we didn't need. We didn't have a lot of time to try a bunch of things. But I think it brought out some really great creativity on the other hand. And I think everyone came in with a very clear thought process of what they were trying to achieve. So I think without the condensed process, I still want to try to get us to these moments where, as we're coming into the theater, we know where we're trying to go. There's still plenty of room to nudge and try things within that, but having a really clear thought process of what we're trying to do, I think, was incredibly helpful on this. I also just think sometimes a virtual meeting was actually really great. It helps with people's schedules. It can be really hard to get everyone together for a production meeting. Helps with people's schedules. You can record it and go back and look at it later. So as much as I think we all have some major Zoom fatigue, I think actually a digital production meeting is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it makes it better to be able to have everyone in the room for a meeting. So that's weirdly a thing I want to keep outside. Not that we would all be digital, but you have the opportunity, if it doesn't work in someone's schedule, to get to the theater for the meeting. They can still join in without it being over the phone or something like that. You still get the visuals, and you can record the meetings for, going back to later, instead of trying to remember or like digging through your notes and being like, what did I mean when I wrote this thing? So I think that was really great. I look forward to going back to focusing on theater for a live audience, I will say. It's been a strange hybrid thinking about theater, but for the camera lens, because we're not trying to make a film. We're aware that there are people that do that better and for their living. We make theater. So we're just trying to capture an honest theater experience on film, which has been, I think, difficult for us. It's a weird transition to try to make. So I look forward to not thinking about that part. Having a live audience. I look forward to once again having to care about all the sight lines.
Exactly.
All the sight lines.
and not the camera's lens. I don't give all the sight lines.
That's like, I did the props on the show, and props, and sometimes with set, you have this lovely, like, 15-20 foot rule. Like, does it look really great from that far because that's where your audience is? The camera is a lot closer, and you no longer get to have that rule.
You can't cheat when the camera zooms in for that close-up. That's ridiculous.
The strangest thing about making theater for film or something that you're filming is that one day it just stops. And it was just so bizarre because when you grow up in the theater, when you're used to your opening night, you're used to your dress rehearsal, then you're used to your preview, then you're used to your opening night, and then you're used to the run where everything sort of like, evolves, and you just have all those wonderful backstage moments, and then you have a closing night to say goodbye to everything. None of that happened. It's like we did tech and stopped, and then the rest of it happens on a computer with like it was me and the amazing Brian Wallenberg from Saturn Blue. We're just exchanging edit notes back and forth. So we're making it in a tiny box.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, I never did ask you about this. I mean, how is it? Because in a lot of ways, one of the big differences between theater and film is that you pretty much shape the performance in the editing room. So how was that for a person who's primarily a theater director to know that, okay, this is everything we have, and what are going to be the best versions of these pieces of Dieter's performance to shape this whole piece? What did you learn from that process?
Well, I learned that just because something worked in the theater doesn't mean it was captured on film. And then something that I thought wasn't great in the theater, or was something, we'll need another take at this, actually is exactly the thing you need because you've changed all the other things around it, and suddenly, like that those moments of focus or having different options or different takes is very important. I think we made a very smart choice, which was to record long, continuous sections, rather than treat it like a film, or treat it like shots, or treat it like this shot, that shot, but actually to kind of run 20 pages at a time and just capture it from different angles, which meant that we had like drafts that we could capture, and we knew that once we had a rich scene where the performance felt really right, we had all the different angles and we knew how all that kind of fit together. The other thing that I learned is there's a surprising amount of stuff that you can't use.
Right.
Because the camera shakes. Or because there was a microphone mistake. Like there's one where the Jeter was like, she slapped her microphone a few times. She didn't even know she was doing it, but she just like, and you're like, well, that kind of ruined. It was in the middle of a kind of really good bit and you couldn't use it, and so that was really interesting, in that you discard all the stuff that doesn't work and then you assemble the rest. And I do think one thing that made it much easier than I expected is that Jeter's performance is just so beautiful. She just really got this character. She got the jokes, she got the truth of it, she got the arc of it. That it wasn't that there was some stuff that was good and some stuff that was bad. It was just different interpretations, and all of it was valid. So we were kind of spoiled for choice. And then it was very much about trying to capture the theatrical magic, which means not going too close for some of these moments. When your instinct as a filmmaker is to push in, you're like, no, it's theater. We need to see the illusion happening. We need to see the lights changing. We need to kind of like find a different rhythm. And also, not for nothing, but Brian has been capturing theater and live performance for a long time. So he has a really, really strong instinct for what works, what's going to look right.
Yeah. For both of you, I mean, what, we talked a little bit about the idea of performance and performance working in this hybrid. How is it to work with designers in this situation? And also, how did, knowing what the challenges were, digital rehearsals, a week to shoot the thing, how did these impact some of your decisions when you had those conversations with designers from the top?
Well, I think it all started with trying to find just the right team for the show. What we were doing is not normal theater, so you start out with trying to find designers who are game to kind of play with this format, because it's unknown water for us. So we were a little bit of the blind leading the blind. So we started out by just getting a great group of collaborators. I think that was really key just having people that were game to adjust and try things and make it work in a condensed time frame with a thing that we're like, we know what we're trying to do. We don't necessarily know how to achieve it. We've never done it before. So that was key, getting the right people in the room. I think from there, there was just a lot of, this is how we think it's going to work. We are going to set up. And then once we got in the space, tweaking and adjusting, Matt already mentioned it, Ben, our awesome lighting designer, roughed in the show, but then when we got camera there and we ran him a monitor up, there was some adjusting levels and things to make it look right on a camera as opposed to the human eye sitting in the theater. For sound, I did not envy them because sound for film and sound for theater are very different, and we did something kind of smack dab in the middle. We didn't want that feel of, we added all this sound later like you would in a film. We still wanted it to have that live theater experience. And a lot of those sounds Jeter was playing off of. So you didn't want to record it in a vacuum of her not being able to hear the sound either. So they really had a challenge of, miking the actor and getting clean feed there, getting us good sound in the room for her to experience, and also sending good sound to camera for that experience. So they definitely had a challenge, and I think they knocked it out of the park. Rashad, who was our sound designer, came up with some really cool stuff. I think some of his underscoring just adds so much to the feel of the show, beyond just, like practical sound effects. I think he really knocked it out of the park. And even like props and costumes where you think it's still just a practical, like, here's the stuff, here's the things you wear. Things looked different under the eye of the camera. Props wise, you had to think about, if we get close, we can see some details and stuff. So you can't cheat. Like I was saying before, you have to make sure everything is camera ready, which is a little different than sometimes stage ready. So it was kind of adding all of those things together, but having the right people that were willing to learn how this works with us. And I would definitely not say that we are experts in the theater on film realm as of yet. But I think we managed to put together a good process that over the week evolved into a really phenomenal theater on film production.
Yeah, one thing that I think was absolutely crucial is that Courtney's a designer as well. And she was a designer on the show, designing props, but she also designed sound. So whenever we were trying to figure out what the process was going to be, we were able to think about, objects and time and money, but also like about aesthetics, like, because it was all about like what is going to get us the most value for the available time, and also trying to be honest about what's just not going to work. And there's also an unusual circumstance on this one, in that we decided not to hire a set designer. That like Courtney and I were going to figure out the kind of shape and function of the space, and then collectively with the lighting designer, we were going to kind of come up with a color idea and a painting idea. And I think the fact that that was collaborative was really important, because Courtney could tell me, here's what we can achieve, and then it's like, okay, well, what shape is it? How close is it to the back wall? What does it look like? Can we add this? Yes, no. So we were able to kind of be really intentional about what that was and how it worked. And then we got together with the lighting designer, and we got some research images. And this amazing scenic painter, Danica, she was just able to take these ideas and be like, oh, like this, boom, and create almost like an original art piece that was like the cherry on top of the collaboration. And it's this floor that looks like sea ice, or it looks like snow, tundra, but in certain light, it looks like marble. So it just sort of captured, it's like a frame that captured all of the ideas. And I felt that iterative process, figuring out what the look and feel of the physical world was going to be, also kind of spilled over into evolving the lights. And then sound really was the cinematic element that was helping us create the images, and that process was great. But I feel we designed and scheduled things towards like a very specific set of outcomes, so So I valued that as someone who is both an artistic director and a director, in that we were able to talk to evolve concept and design simultaneously from a very early stage.
So moving forward, I mean, we're now in the early stages of prepping for the next show, Fires in the Mirror. Courtney's a part of that as
Yeah.
well. And just, thinking about what theater might look like in the next couple of months and maybe in the next year, depending on what's happening in the world and what's going on with the pandemic. Um, how would you approach doing a project like this kind of hybrid thing differently? Matt, if you were directing another show like this, how would you approach it differently? And Courtney, you're uh, in the middle of this right now. So, so how are you approaching this differently than you did?
I think I would prioritize more time together, like physically together. Like even if that was something like just a couple of lunches or something, like before the rehearsal began. Just those human touch points.
Yeah.
You can't simulate those. You can't zoom your way into that kind of a real relationship with people. And really it's about that kind of quiet. There's quiet because you can figure out a schedule and you can figure out a drawing, you can figure out all of those things. But that togetherness that I think is fundamental to the experience of theater is something that needs to be protected. And for Fires in the Mirror, it's a director actor combo that they know one another. There's like years of relationship there, and I think that's absolutely crucial for the speed at which they're able to work in this truncated process. But yeah, as we look to next season, I think it's really placing a concrete value on that togetherness, on those moments, or because it's not that the whole thing needs to be together or that we need to kind of prioritize one over the other. I think Courtney's idea about virtual production meetings or the value of Zoom for certain projects or certain meetings is I think our industry will never be the same, certainly based on that. But it just makes me understand more, what it means to look someone in the eye.
Yeah, we're approaching the next one fairly similarly. It's a little different in that it's going to be a live stream as opposed to filming. So it keeps much more of the kind of live nightly feel in that. And that you're literally going to capture a live run each time. So there's no like going back, there's no pickups. So you get to approach it in many ways just like a typical run. We'll tech in a similar fashion. The weird change addition is the camera as opposed to your audience. So that remains the main challenge. So we're approaching it in similar ways. This group is really focused on, though, making sure we keep the live feel so that there's value to it being a live individual performance each time, as opposed to like a video on demand situation. Because if you're asking people to tune in at a specific time for a live event, you want to try to keep as much of that live in the house feel as you can, of course, from their home. On this, virtual production meetings have been extremely our friend because we have a director coming in from out of town. Right. So he's still in Washington, D.C. right now. So the virtual production meeting is kind of a necessity on this one. But it also allows you to get people's disparate schedules because, even as stuck at home as we all have been, everybody's ramping back up and everybody's getting more and more busy. And so trying to fit in meetings is a challenge. We're on a condensed schedule again. I, once again, just want to note, I do not want to condense schedules ever. The more time we can have, the more meetings, the better. But I, in a similar fashion, think it's really helping us focus down in on what we need, what we want, what we're trying to achieve. So I'm still looking to keep some of that focus, but stretch it out a little longer.
Yeah, ease into it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Time to consider some things.
Exactly, you ponder a little. So this is my last question, and it's kind of personal, so you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But I would love to know, what does Rory's story mean for each of you personally?
Well, I mean, do you mind if I go first, Courtney?
Go for it.
Yeah. As an immigrant who lives thousands of miles away from my parents, like it's like my greatest fear.
Yeah.
So I think about it all the time. What's it going to be like when I lose one of my parents? And, I'm very likely not going to be there. And certainly when you're not allowed to travel, or if I go, I got to quarantine for 14 days and before just the kind of logistical hurdles. I think that's probably one of the main reasons that this play just sort of like, I felt that kind of like powerful urge to do it. It was a kind of morbid curiosity about that kind of grief. But then also the fact that the play is about someone trying to get through it. Not someone who's sitting there being crushed by grief, but who says, I can't do this. I got to do something. I got to get out there. I got to move. So the play, as well as being about grief, is about growth.
Yeah.
And I think that for a subject matter that I find like quite frightening and, very vulnerable, that ultimately was my takeaway from the process is it's a play about transformation. Mm-hmm. And when you're there, there's this stunning end to the play, this amazing image of letting go and release. And it's everything. It's definitely something I would appreciate as an audience member, but something that I valued as an artist, to be able to explore with this team is what is that moment at the end of letting it all go.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that in reading the play, but especially in watching Dieter's performance of it, that just hits me every time is it's such a great coming of age story.
Yeah, definitely.
That's so nuanced. Like Tatty does a great job. The grief is propelling her, but we have these moments where she is experiencing sexuality, and she is basically living in a much more adult world than she has, and in fact it really hits her when she's told she's a child and she can't do this, and what are you doing? You can't do this, you're a child. We get so many male coming of age stories kind of in the literature, and now more and more we're getting more explorations of that, especially on television shows. But I feel like this one is so nuanced, and when you add on top of that her working her way through her grief, you can see her aging in that. And so Jeter's performance of it really made that hit home for me, even more than just reading the show.
Actually, Tatty has this lovely introduction to the play where she compares adolescence, grief, and polar exploration as being like a Venn diagram of, you're lost and no one's got a map for you, and you kind of got to just move through it, and just how that metaphor of the kind of frozen wilderness at the top of the earth is a pretty good one for a kind of young girl coming of age, and also the endless exploration of grief, and as a journey inward as well as outward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you both for being here on the show, but also for shepherding this like beautiful, intimate, powerful piece about resilience and about transformation. I'm just hoping everyone comes out to see Rory's story on the big screens or small screens that you access this information from. So thank you both for being here, and thank you for telling this beautiful story.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions today.